Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. It was great seeing so many of you in New York this last week at the Armory Show and at gallery openings around the city. After the summer break, it really felt like the art world was back in school. The Armory was, of course, the main event of the week. It's become something of a polarizing fair. On one hand, it's large at the Javits Center, but the quality of exhibitors feels uneven. Some galleries chose to skip it altogether, questioning the value of showing in New York when they already have spaces there, or just feeling like the booths were too expensive and not worth it, while others looked to Freeze Soul as an alternative. To break down the first big week of the fall season, we're joined in this week's episode by Daniel Cassady, art business reporter for ARTnews, who covered the fair and the surrounding events of the week. Daniel, it's so great having you back on the podcast. How have you been?
I've been very well, Adam. Thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. We always enjoy having you on and hearing your perspective. So the summer period during the art world is typically a slower one with not that much news, but it seemed like the opposite this year. There were reports of multiple gallery closures. The market sentiment as a result of some of the reporting seemed to turn negative. But you actually reported that the mood kind of shifted at the Armory this year. Things felt a little bit upbeat, maybe compared to the summer. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I mean, you have a point when you say the summer was pretty bleak, and I think the Armory was a good contrast to that. The weather was lovely in New York. It was a beautiful day. Despite the Javits Center being so far, people were very excited to be there. And I think despite the negative nature or negative perception of the market over the past, I mean, you can even argue more than 6 months, more than a year, but especially over the summer, the Armory was a great chance for people to look at the positive side. You know, that negative mood, that sourness in the market has been around for a long time, but I really think that's still pangs from the market getting over the COVID era. It was a very different time, even just a few years ago, interest rate wise and politically. There were a lot of closures this summer. I hesitate even to say a lot, though, because something that I've noticed a lot of people conflating or flat out getting wrong, even walking around the aisles of the Armory Show, we're putting all these closures together, right? Tim Blum closed for completely different reasons than Adam Lindemann chose to shut the doors on Venus over Manhattan. Kasman didn't close at all. They rebranded and are changing the name of the gallery, a decision that was discussed with Paul Kasman before he passed away. So I think there's a lot of nuance into what those quote unquote closures were and how they happened, and it's dangerous to kind of lump them all together, which leads to a kind of catastrophic idea of what the market is like. It's very simple to just kind of reduce it all down to, oh, these galleries are all closing because the market is bad, when there are a lot of other factors that go into why someone would choose to no longer sell art, whether it's a decision that they were forced to make financially or that they, chose to make because they want to try something different.
I think that's a really great point you made about the lack of nuance that's occurring in some reporting and some dialogue within the art world about the fact that these gallery closures or gallery changes, they weren't all happening for the same reason. Yes, I think the softening art market is a driving force behind some of them, but each situation is quite different. And honestly, that's why I love having this podcast. We can get into the nuances and details that seem to be missing from time to time. And so you also mentioned that the ambiance at the fair was better than expected. I felt that as well from my conversations there with collectors and galleries, even artists. Everyone seemed very happy to see one another after the summer break. It almost felt like the first day of school. That seemed to be at least the running joke we were all having. And it was just great to be with one another and see so much art after the summer lull.
Yeah, there was definitely that kind of first day of school energy. I'd never heard that term until I think the second or third year that I started reporting on art. But there is this kind of where everyone is, one, excited to see you, and two, kind of side eye checking out your outfit or checking out your booth, wondering if they should be jealous, and then looking at their outfit and wondering, did I wear the best thing?
Yeah, there definitely was a little bit of that. So compared to the really robust market we saw a few years ago coming out of COVID to where we are today, I'm wondering, are you noticing changes in maybe what galleries bring to a fair like the Armory compared to a few years ago, and also even how they are actually interacting with collectors and visitors in their booths in this climate?
I think this is one of the best things about Armory this year. Um, the fair in previous years kind of fell into this pigeonhole of relying on trends. Not the fair in particular, but the people that showed there. There was one year and you would see just an overabundance of fiber art. Another year you would see, every other booth had 5 or 6 black figurative paintings in it. This year, something that I thought was really impressive was that there were almost no visible trends that percolated through the whole fair, which to me means that every dealer that was there has realized, at least subconsciously, that the only way to survive in the market right now is to fully be yourself. The best dealers that I know, their basic tenet for doing business, and it is a business, is being true to the program. And that program is a reflection of how that dealer thinks, right? If an art dealer starts trying to chase trends, which is an obvious result of trying to chase the money that comes from the people buying those trends, you start to lose who you are as a dealer and lose what it means to have a gallery. So walking through the aisles, it was almost jarring, but in a very positive way, how different one booth was from the next. I think I only saw one Kusama, which is pretty wild. It was just such a lovely thing to see, that how much richness there was and how different all the booths were. As for, how they're interacting with clients and collectors, this is another positive of that kind of another positive result, I guess, out of this rectification, I like to call it, of the market. Things probably should never have gotten as boomy and frothy as they were the last couple of years. I'll never stop saying, it's a false equivalency to compare sales figures from now to 3 and 4 years ago when, like I said before, interest rates were so low, money was free, and that prodded, several collectors and would-be collectors and finance bros to start speculating and flipping because it was, one, easy money. There was almost no chance of losing money because of the hype behind some of these artists. Now, it's all about conversations. Sales are definitely still happening, but what would have happened in 6 minutes in 2022, 2023, now takes 2 days. That's definitely hard for dealers who are accustomed to working at that breakneck pace. But I would bet, and a lot of the dealers I've spoken to agree, that a sale that happens at that 2-day pace will go to a collector that's going to come back and talk to you again. Will go to a collector that actually cares about that work and wants to hang it up on their wall and not put it at auction at Phillips or Christie's in a year or move it to storage. The people that are buying art now, and there are quite a few, are people that care about the art.
Yeah, I could definitely feel a shift in the dynamic at the fair compared to other art fairs in the past. The conversations with galleries, they seem more thoughtful, and as a potential buyer, you often had more of the gallery's attention, and it wasn't the kind of selling frenzy necessarily that we've seen in the past. Instead, there was more space to take your time, to make considered decisions, and really discuss and learn about the merits of the art with the galleries. And so you reported a range of sales at the fair in your coverage in ARTnews. From what you observed, what types of works are attracting the strongest demand and which ones are proving maybe harder to place with collectors at the moment?
I mean, it's no surprise that the top end is still the hardest for dealers to move. And that's another great thing about Armory this year. There were multiple booths that had, mid-range price works between 10 and 50, but also booths that had, David Nolan had a wonderful booth. It was all works on paper, kind of salon hang style from every artist that you can imagine. Allison Katz, Andy Warhol, Baselitz, Chuck Close, and I think the cheapest thing was like $5K, which is shockingly cheap for, let's say, shockingly inexpensive, right, for buying something at an art fair. I know there were seven-figure sales for sure. Some of them were told to me in confidence, so I can't really say what they were. I will tell you that something that I noticed, works that were, there's this kind of in literary circles, there's this idea of like a new romanticism coming around. Substack essays are like 20,000 words long, unedited. It's this idea of kind of embracing the natural, embracing nature. Works that had some kind of natural angle to them, whether it was a quilted work or whether it was a painting in like a bucolic kind of scene. Those seem to do really, really well. And of course, especially if they were priced well. An example would be Emily Cohen from Rob Dimmon's booth. She had these very kind of lush forest scenes with lingerie-clad women running around. It was very sensual. It was risque, but also had this very calming kind of... It didn't look impressionistic in style, but it had that same lushness where you kind of want to lay in the grass as you would, if you wanted to have lunch with the people in a Degas or a Manet painting. You feel like should be able to cuddle up on the grass and eat a sandwich with those people.
So I would say that the Armory, honestly, is one of the most polarizing fairs in the art world. You ask galleries, collectors, everyone seems to have a pretty strong opinion one way or another about the fair. Of course, there are a lot of galleries that are participating, but there are many that opt out and choose not to participate. Some of those are New York-based galleries who feel like just having their gallery in New York is sufficient and they really don't need to be at the fair. Other galleries are choosing to do free soul instead. From your conversations, did this edition shift perceptions of the fair standing in the art world, or do people maybe remain divided about its role and its importance?
I mean, it's such a tough... Armory is in such a tough position, right? Frieze is essentially fighting against itself. Frieze, which owns the Armory, it's fighting against itself with having a fair in Seoul and having a fair in New York at the same time. That said, the director of the Armory Show, Kyla McMillan, did such a good job. It was a real coup getting dealers like Andrew Krebs and Esther Schipper back for the first time in a while. White Cube came back, which is a fantastic get. If one thing that the Armory has been lacking for years now, it's that real kind of blue chip presence. And White Cube being there, I think, sends a really big signal that the Armory Show should be taken seriously. I personally wasn't at Seoul, obviously, but it's something that, people have to think about. Uh, where do collectors want to spend their time? Um, and where do you want to, as a dealer, spend your time reconnecting with clients and finding new clients? I think for a lot of people, they were just reminded that New York, for better or worse, really is the center of the art world. And, if you want to meet new people, you should do it in the city.
So the Armory really was the first big test for the art market coming out of the summer break. Reflecting now on all the information we have about how the fair went, what do you think it may suggest about where the market stands as we head into the fall season full of auctions and fairs and other market tests?
That's a good question. I mean, it's so hard to prognosticate, without that much information. It was the very first thing, but I'd like to think that the Armory Show gives a I'd like to think that the Armory Show gave collectors and dealers a kind of slice of what things could be like if you embrace the fact that the world is different than it was 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and that the slower pace of doing things and the more honest you are to your program, these can be beneficial in the long run for your business, and it can be beneficial for collectors as well. As the auctions come up, I'd like to see things do well, but that really depends on if people are willing to separate pieces from their collection. An auction can only be as good as the works that they get. That's the hard part about being a specialist, right? You spend your whole career trying to get people to sell something that maybe they really like. And most times people will only do that for top dollar. Right now might not be the time you can get top dollar for any given work, unless it's the rarest of the rare. It's not going to be, a breezy remainder of the year, but I think that if viewed with perspective and with, budgets in mind, dealers can do really well. It really is kind of a back to basics time. Stick to your program. Don't blow all your money on parties, but do throw a party every once in a while.
Yeah, yes, please.
It's kind of like, in the same sense that September is back to school, we need to, as just denizens of this art world, kind of remember that we're in a period where things are evolving, maybe to a simpler way. And evolving takes time, and it's not always painless, unfortunately. But the best always, in my view, the best people tend to make it through hard times. So I'm feeling good about the future. We'll just have to wait and see.
Definitely. Well, Daniel, really appreciate you coming on the podcast after a really busy week covering the Armory and everything happening in New York. We really appreciate your perspective on the art world and the art market at this moment. And if our listeners don't read your coverage in ARTnews already, they definitely should. They should follow you on social media as well. Where can we follow you?
I am at Cassady Photos on Instagram and at Daniel Cassady on X. Lord knows when the last time I used it was. Things are all mostly on Instagram, aren't they, these days? And then, of course, everything I write is on ArtNews as well.
Perfect. Thanks so much again, Daniel, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for having me, Adam. That was fun.